Hey guys, what's going on? Andy Clements here with another episode of the Muscle Building Mastery Podcast, and in today's episode I want to talk a little bit about the squat, bench and deadlift brigade, and whether you actually need to do squats, benches and deadlifts in your workouts in order to build real muscle. So this is something that I always used to think that you had to do in every single, if not every single workout, every single week you had to do a squat, bench and deadlift, otherwise you would just not be able to build muscle whatsoever, right? And that's because there's like this huge movement, and I think maybe it comes from like powerlifting, right? But there's this huge movement that's made its way into the world of muscle building, that says that if you don't squat and if you don't deadlift and if you don't bench press in the conventional sense that you would in like a powerlifting competition, for example, then you're not going to build muscle, right? If you don't bench press with a barbell, if you don't squat with a bar on your back, if you don't deadlift conventionally, then you're missing out on muscle gains. And this is something that as you can probably guess by now, I'm going to challenge a little bit in this episode, right? Now, I used to always think that this was the case. I used to always think that you had to do these three movements. I sort of subscribed to the thought process because these are like the big three movements, right? And I thought if you don't have them in every workout, you're going to have them in every week, and you have to plan your workouts around these big three movements. Like, oh, make sure you've got a bench press, make sure you start every chest day with a bench press, you start every back day with a deadlift, you start every leg day with a back squat. That's how I used to do things, and I did it for a long time. And although you know, these are big movements and they've been key movements and they've stood the test of time for a reason, I did find that obviously I made some progress, but I found that I was getting a lot of injuries and I was getting a lot of muscle imbalances where certain pairs of muscles were imbalanced, you know, so one area was stronger than its opposing side, so you know that can cause problems in itself, and it caused a lot of injuries for me, which was really, really frustrating because I was following what I thought I was meant to do. And all I really wanted to do was get strong. I wanted to get strong at these big kind of movements, you know, or just get strong in general. I want to get strong in general, but you know, the big movements, how you kind of test your strength, right? They're kind of how you know, nobody asks how much do you bicep curl, right? Everybody asks how much do you bench, how much do you deadlift, how much do you squat. That's what everybody wants to know. So I wanted to get strong. I wanted to be able to sort of brag about it, right? But I also really wanted for that to translate into more muscle, because that's the reason I was training. That's the reason we all train. If you listen to this podcast, Muscle Building Mastery, then that's the reason you want to train as well. You want to build more muscle, right? So that's why I wanted to do it. So I wasn't kind of in love with these movements. I wasn't romantic about them in any sense, but I wanted to get strong at them because I thought that was going to translate to more muscle mass. And so I kept doing them, and I kept I kept getting injured, and I kept getting these muscle imbalances, and you know, I got to the stage where I've got a lot bigger over the course of my training career, but I've never been like 300 pounds. Like, I'm not like Phil Heath, big Ramy, like, you know, ridiculous size. Like, I should be able to bend over and tie my shoelaces, right? You know, I'm natural, I don't take any drugs or anything like that, so I'm never going to be 400 pounds shredded, right? I sit 200 to 220 pounds, and that's big for me, and I like that size. So the point I'm making with that is I should be able to have good mobility at this size, right? Regardless of how big I'm able to get. Naturally, I should still be able to have decent mobility, and because of my fixation with these big three movements, my mobility sucked. Like, like sitting on the floor. I can remember my friend started a yoga studio, and I went along to a supporter one day, and I couldn't sit cross-legged at the floor. Like, guys, I'm 27 now. Back then I was about 24, 25. And as a 24, 25-year-old, you can't sit cross-legged on the floor for more than 3 or 4 minutes without being in intense pain in the hips and the back and the shoulders, and everything's kicking off, and your body's just telling you don't want to be in that position. That was like a big warning sign for me, you know. And I would suggest, like, if you go to some kind of yoga class, or you just try sitting on the floor cross-legged like you used to do when you were a kid, and you can't do it for more than a couple of minutes, that's a sign of really, really bad mobility, and probably something in your training program needs to be addressed. And that was my first real sign of, like, hang on, something's not really quite right here. So I sort of stewed on that for a little while, and I ended up having this thought. I was sat thinking about it. In fact, I wasn't sat, I was walking down the street one day thinking about this, thinking about this particular issue of why I was struggling with my mobility, and I was getting injured, having these muscle imbalances all the time. And I thought, what if in your training programs you did these big three movements, but you didn't do them exactly as everybody else did them. Instead of doing the exact movement of the bench, the squat and the deadlift, you swapped those out for similar types of movements that better suited your body. Does that make sense? So instead of doing the deadlift, for example, you might do a sumo deadlift, which is a wider stance deadlift. Or, you know, instead of doing that, you could do a rack pull, or you could do an RDL, like a heavy RDL, or a heavy stiff leg deadlift, or something like that, right? You could swap the heavy pulling movement out of a conventional deadlift, which doesn't suit everybody's body. It definitely doesn't suit my body for the reason of the hip and the ankle mobility I don't necessarily have. I can do them, but it's really uncomfortable. You compensate with a movement that's very similar and performs a very similar job, but better suits your body. So that would be a few deadlift alternatives. A few squat alternatives. You know, a squat, again, as I got injured multiple times doing back squats. Because not only do you need the right hip and ankle and all that mobility down the bottom, but you also need the shoulder mobility, because you've got to hold the bar on your back, right? So I never had that good range of shoulder mobility. So trying to pull my hand back to grab the bar meant that I had to compensate by arching my lower back and pulling my rib cage up. Does that make sense? So while I had this bar on my back and I was under like 140, 160, 180, whatever I was squatting, my lower back was massively hyperextended, and my pelvis was tilted, my arse was sticking out, and all the rest of that stuff. So I ended up really injuring myself a couple of different occasions doing squats, and it was rough, and that really sucked. So instead of doing the barbell back squats, which I still can do, you know, for working my shoulder mobility and stuff like that, I still can do them. I don't really like going ridiculously heavy on them, but I can do them. You know, I would swap them out for a hack squat, for example. A hack squat is one of my absolute favourites because your position of your arms are here. Like, if you're listening, the position of the arms are kind of like near the ears, like with the hammer grip just in front sort of the face. So you don't actually have to have any shoulder mobility to do a hack squat. It's really simple. Or you could do a pendulum squat, which is a very similar kind of movement. Or you could do a safety bar squat, which is like a mimic free weight version of a hack squat with the hands in that position. Or a front squat, or a dumbbell squat, or there's tons of Smith machine squat. There's tons of different types of squats that you could do that load the quads and the glutes a lot and pour a decent amount of weight through there, but that doesn't mean you have to risk injury if your body isn't set up for them. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying here. I'm not trashing the conventional squat, the conventional deadlift, the conventional bench press. If you get on really well with those three movements and you've seen amazing results with them and you're not getting injured, and you've not got any muscular imbalances and everything's going good, keep doing it. That's amazing. Well done, you. But for the rest of us who have bodies that aren't, you know, specifically built for those kinds of movements, and we're trying to like twist ourselves to get in the right position for certain kinds of movements, looking at alternatives that are better suited to our goals and our bodies is a really smart idea. We need to remember that we can't get like romantic, and we can't be too involved with particular movements or particular exercises, because it's not about that. What we need to be involved with is the end result, and the exercises that we choose are just tools to get us to the end result. Does that make sense? So there's a ton of different ways to get to the same result, is what I'm trying to say here, and you just got to pick the things that work best for you. Right? So, you know, instead of the squat, you might do the hack squat. Instead of the deadlift, you might do the RDL. Instead of the bench press, you might do a dumbbell press, or an incline press, or a Smith machine press, or a hammer strength press with a different position for the elbows and the shoulders. It's entirely up to you, but you've got to just take into account the mechanics of your body, and make sure that you're choosing things that aren't putting you in like compromising positions, you know? So that's what I decided to do. Like, going back to my little story, my little anecdote here, that's what I decided to do. I decided to choose movements that best suited my body. I was picking RDLs or sumo deadlifts or rack pulls primarily for the big pulling back movements. I was picking a machine press or a low incline dumbbell press was one of my favourites for the chest on push days. And I was, like I said before, I was picking either a hack squat or a dumbbell squat. Not a dumbbell squat, a pendulum squat should I say. A hack squat or a pendulum squat were my favourites for leg days, for squatting movements. And it's not to say that that's better or worse than the free weight conventional alternatives, but for me they were better movements. Now for you, I don't know. It depends on your body, right? It's too specific to really get into it there, because I don't know, there's all different kinds of people going to be watching this podcast. But for me, they were way better movements. And although it took me a while to sort of get used to these movements and teach myself the new mechanics and stuff like that, and it took me a while to start building the strength back up, because remember, these are new movements, so I wasn't as strong at them. So I had to start small and then build my way back up and back up and back up by logbooking religiously, like I spoke about in the previous podcast, and doing all that strength stuff that we know we need to do. I started to get strong in them, and when I finally overcame that little mini hurdle there of not being able to perform movements, or not knowing how to perform those, teach myself how to perform them, and then getting strong at them. Once I did that, I was long-term less injury prone. Like, I very, very rarely get injured, even minorly, in the gym anymore, because I pick my movements wisely. Even during lockdowns, when I've been training in a garage, I've been picking my movements wisely and not doing things that trigger muscle imbalances or poor movement patterns in my own body. And I had a more balanced and more muscular physique in the long run as well. So it just massively benefited my physique, both from an injury standpoint and from a muscular standpoint. So it was such I'm so glad I did it. You know, it was such a good decision. And I would just urge you guys, if you're finding that you're married to these squat, bench and deadlift movements that come from the world of powerlifting and have kind of made their way into the muscle building world, if they work for you, great. But if you are struggling with them, if you're getting muscle imbalances, if you're getting injuries, maybe have a look at seeing if you can change them out. Now, just for clarity, I'm not saying don't lift heavy. I'm not saying don't do those kinds of movements. In fact, I am saying do those kinds of movements. Do something that replicates a bench press, either a bench press or something similar that suits your body, and get strong at it. You know, build your strength up over time and get superhumanly strong for you at that movement. Same with the squatting movement, same with the pulling movement, the deadlift or the sumo or the RDL or the straight leg deadlift or the rack pull or whatever it is, right? Do those kinds of movements, but pick it carefully, and then once you know it's the right one for you, get insanely strong at it. Okay? So that's it. That's what I ended up doing. That's what I ended up discovering. And as I got more and more muscular and my injuries started to subside, I started to grow in confidence, which was amazing. I started to be able to help other people more effectively with this kind of stuff, because, you know, this kind of stuff really is the meat and potatoes of muscle building with your training, because the big, heavy compound lifts, right? And we all know that the big, heavy compound lifts are what builds the muscle. But you pick them big, heavy compound lifts right, and you will be able to build muscle much faster and stay injury-free, which I was able to help hundreds of people to do, which was really, really awesome just for that one little bit. So if you take one thing from this podcast, it's just to pick your movements wisely and make sure that you are picking movements that are suited for your body. And also, the one other thing that I forgot to mention there really is, by picking movements that are well suited for your body, what I was able to do with that, and what loads of other people are able to do with that as well, is pick movements that address those imbalances that you've already made, right? So for me, for squatting and deadlifting conventionally for so many years, I had really, really strong and tight quads, but really, really weak hamstrings. Okay, so by swapping my conventional deadlift for a sumo deadlift or an RDL, or even sometimes a rack pull because of the way that I lift it, but a sumo deadlift and an RDL, right, that has less knee flexion, so you bend your knee less in those two movements, and it's got much more hamstring activation, right? So it's still a heavy pulling movement, performs the same kind of movement, but there's less strain on the quads and there's more strain on the hamstrings, which meant I addressed that imbalance. I was able to get less lower back pain. I was able to get to fix my hips and all that kind of stuff, because I was able to address that muscular imbalance within the session without having to do any crazy mobility work, without having to, take 6 months off the gym to rehab myself, right? I was able to rehab myself while I was building muscle. Isn't that cool? So that's the last point I wanted to make on that, because that was really, really powerful for me. And it was powerful for a ton of other people that have helped as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you took some value from that. If you did, if you're watching this on YouTube, please drop me a like. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Let me know if you want to see any sort of different topics answered on future podcasts. If you're listening to this on Anchor or Google or Spotify or iTunes or any other podcasts out there, drop me a review if you possibly can. I would really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much for everybody who already has. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow the podcast on your podcast app. And I will speak to you next time in the Muscle Building Mastery podcast. Bye.